Hey, what's up, everyone? We're in part 3 in our discussion series on prayer. We're talking through all kinds of different streams of prayer, practices of prayer, some that might be familiar to us, others that might be totally new. But of course, our goal is not just to talk about the idea of prayer, but to put prayer into practice. So could I challenge you in your small group, lean in, open up, share, stretch yourself, get out of your comfort zone a little bit. We want to practice prayer in our small group. So I want to challenge you to step out of your comfort zone wherever you can. We believe that there will be a deepening in our prayer experience and our relationship with God through these moments. And I want to challenge you too, not just in your small group, but take it home into your personal, individual practice of prayer. Experiment a little. Try something new. And we know that the Spirit is going to deepen our relationship with Him through these practices. And that's our goal for this discussion series on prayer. And here in part 3, we want to talk about a stream of prayer that might be familiar to some, or it could be totally new for you. It's the stream of contemplative prayer. If you're totally new to contemplative prayer is a type of prayer that seeks to encounter God through meditating on His nature, His teaching, or His work in one's life. It's to read, to ponder, to reflect, and to listen. The purpose of contemplative prayer is to draw close to God and make one better able to hear God's voice by eliminating distraction and reducing anxiety. This form of prayer is sometimes referred to as breathing prayer or listening prayer, but practitioners of contemplative prayer know that to know God well is to know His voice and not to be fooled by some imposter voice. It's to be able to discern what is of God and what is not. This is what it means to know God deeply. Simply, contemplative prayer is to sit in the presence of God. It's to center our attention on a scripture or an idea related to God, or to ponder our own experience as it's connected to God. It's to allow the Spirit then to minister and speak to us with the intent, all of this, to understand and relate to God in a deeper way. And there might be somebody out there who's like, okay, this sounds a little bit wonky, maybe a little bit hippie. You're like, is this rooted in some maybe real concern? Is this rooted in New Age mysticism? It kind of sounds like that stuff. Or maybe it's Eastern religion. This sounds kind of wonky and strange for my 21st century Western mind. That's a fair question. And I just, as we move forward, want to lay a little bit of foundation here from Scripture on the tradition of contemplative spirituality and the contemplative stream of Christian expression. We can see from Scripture, even in the Old Testament, that the prophet Elijah was attuned to the still blowing voice of intimate, personal communion with God. We see that David, king of Israel, highlights the value of this type of spiritual discipline. In Psalm 4:4, he says, meditate within your heart on your bed and be still. Another psalmist similarly represents the Lord as exhorting His people to be still and know that I am God. Jesus Himself, who lived and breathed the Old Testament scriptures, often retired to quiet, secluded spots in the wilderness or on mountains where He could converse and enjoy the presence of His Father. Jesus believed that it was important to get away from the noise and the distraction of the world. And in time, His disciples learned to follow this example. Now, we could go on and on. There are many examples from Old Testament and New Testament Scripture about contemplative prayer and the contemplative stream of followers of Jesus, people who follow God, God's people responding in contemplative ways. And we don't just have a basis of biblical foundation in an example, but we have a strong tradition of Christian contemplation and mysticism that has grown up within the church over the past 2,000 years. Many of the early church fathers of the first 3 centuries of the Christian era, men that you may be familiar with, people like Gregory of Nyssa, Basil of Caesarea, John Chrysostom, and Anthony of Egypt, friends that you're familiar with, and many, many more. We could add more to the list. These people were contemplatives who had mystical experiences in prayer. This tradition has nothing, I think, to do with a depersonal, self-focused, or escapist tradition that is often rooted in a lot of New Age mysticism and spirituality or Eastern religious practice. This is not rooted there. I think it's simply a post-Enlightenment idea that we might have, that the only way we're supposed to engage with the Spirit is through intellectualizing God. Since the Enlightenment, most of our modern Western society is only interested in encountering God through study and reason, seeing mystical traditions or contemplative streams and practices as useless or even dangerous. And that's not to say that study and reason and theology are problematic. In fact, I think they're necessary to a well-rounded, deep, devoted Christian life. Necessary. But to write off the contemplative stream of Christian faith, which has been practiced since Jesus himself walked the earth, is, I think, missing out on so much of the relationship our Father wants to have with us. I believe Jesus is calling followers to be rooted in the Scriptures and committed to rational thought, but also deeply moved to his feet like children who long to simply sit in his company and have him unlock the mysteries of the unseen world to them. This, I think, is a rich life of deep relationship and study. Now, with all that said, we really went for it there. With all of that said, maybe we'd ask the question, why contemplative prayer? What's the benefit of a contemplative form of prayer? I think contemplative prayer is a powerful practice in the life of every Jesus follower. It's a practice that helps to deepen us, and I would notify, I'll just give you two primary ways I think it helps to deepen us in our practice. I think first, the practice of contemplative prayer reorders our perspective. It reorders our perspective. It's completely possible, it's impossible, I think, to consistently sit in the presence of God, to meditate on his words and his ways, and not have my worldview shaped and formed around his perspective. Impossible to spend time with him and not be shaped and formed by how he sees the world. Pete Greig says it like this, as I meditate on the Lord and become aware of his presence, my center of gravity shifts from me and God to God and me. He takes the center stage. I think first, the practice of contemplative prayer in time, as we spend time in the presence of God, it reorders our perspective. And second, I think a practice of contemplative prayer deepens our relationship. We don't only begin to see the world the way God sees it, but we also begin to more clearly see God himself for who he really is. I don't know if you ever made a new friend and you had an idea about what kind of person they were. You were like, I get your personality, I got you figured out, I figured out your interests. You almost peg them, and maybe not in a negative way. You just kind of go like, okay, I know what kind of person you are. I kind of know you in a general sense. I kind of know what kind of guy you are or girl you are. I know who you are. And in time, maybe this happened in a relationship where you're like, the more you got to know them through intentional connection and hearing their story a little bit more and knowing their personality a little bit deeper, you kind of realize, whoa, you were nothing like I thought you were at first. I don't know if you had this encounter before. I think our relationship with God has so many different layers and facets that we're only tapping the surface of. And contemplative prayer is an effort to really know the person of God, to hear his voice and discern his will for us. Teresa of Avila says it like this: contemplative prayer, in my opinion, is nothing else than a close sharing between friends. It means taking time frequently to be alone with him who we know loves us. Contemplative prayer is a powerful practice that can influence many areas of our spiritual formation. And the primary areas I see just right off the bat is, if you were going to start in contemplative prayer, I think you'll see a couple noticeable changes. And I think first, you'll see a change in perspective in time, and you'll also see a deepening of relationship in time. Which brings us to the simple question, how do we actually practice a contemplative prayer? What does it mean to step into the stream? There are many different ways. It's important to recognize this. There are many different ways to integrate contemplative prayer into our prayer practice. But I think the best way is to dive in and experiment, to know the fundamentals of what it is to have a contemplative prayer life, and just jump in there and experiment a little bit. Remember, at its root, the act of contemplating words of God or the nature of God or meditating on Scripture, taking time to remember what God's doing within you, this is all contemplative prayer practice. But I could give you a specific example. I'd encourage you to just dive in and experiment, follow where the Spirit's leading, and just enjoy his presence a little bit. You don't need a ton of structure to start. But let me give you just one example of a specific prayer that may start you on a journey of contemplative prayer. It's a prayer called the Prayer of Examen. The Prayer of Examen is rooted, and it's originated from Ignatius of Loyola, and he recommended this form of prayer to his disciples. While this prayer itself is practiced in many different forms, there are so many different kinds of prayer of examen, it's in the contemplative stream of prayer, and it's a great place to start. A prayer of examen is simple. It's a prayer of reviewing the day. At the end of your day, here's what it looks like. taking time at the end of your day and first take a moment to just sit and turn your awareness to the presence of God that's with you. Breathe deeply. Enjoy the company of the Spirit. Just sit there for a moment and enjoy his company. Maybe you thank him and you take some breaths to say, Lord, just thank you for how you're sitting with me. I enjoy your presence. Spend time just to soak for a moment. Maybe visualize the Spirit of God with you. Let him into your imagination, to move in your imagination and visualize him sitting with you. Take a moment to sit and turn your awareness to the presence of God. And then review your day. Walk through piece by piece. What are the primary beats of your day? What happened today? Maybe you ask yourself questions like, where did I feel closest to God today? When did I feel furthest from him? What brought me joy today? What brought me pain? Walk through the moments throughout your day, the emotional highs and lows, the spiritual highs and lows, the relational highs and lows. And then, finally, listen to the Spirit. Based on my responses to the previous questions, what does this reveal to me about who God is, about how life works, about who I am? This is the prayer of Examen. And it's just a sampling of the incredibly rich and life-giving stream of contemplative prayer. As with any form of prayer, the goal is that prayer is first and foremost for deepening relationship with our Father. Prayer is for being with Jesus, getting to know Jesus, and in time, being shaped in his image.